If you're going to be making speeches about the annexation of territory, you can't expect Ukraine or Western leaders or the West to play nice with you and start signing ceasefires. And that puts some heavy pressure on Putin because he said they're willing to negotiate in response to this with a Russian president, but that president will not be Putin, which might end up backfiring on Zelensky's government. And so it was not the democratic will of the people. And every time you see anybody try to pretend for even the slightest moment that this could actually be the democratic will of the people, then you've known you found the deepest liquor of Russian boots. This person will deep throat a Russian boot if it means getting them attention on the internet. Let's go watch this Putin speech. I think it's time. I think it's time we watch this Putin speech. We've talked so much about it. It has so much anticipation. Also, apparently Putin made a nuclear threat here. Well, he didn't directly make a nuclear threat. He said, it's kind of funny, everybody's angry about, nuclear war these days, but I mean, America nuked Japan. Well, that's the gist of his argument about nuclear weapons. Anyway, let's listen to the speech.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is due to speak any second now. He is speaking after holding that referendum, that sham referendum. There let's take a listen to what he has to say.
See, that's what you need, by the way, when people talk about the referendum. Don't just call it the referendum, call it a sham. Call it nonsense. Be honest about it. There we go. France 24. France 24 also did some terrible shit earlier in the war, like posting pictures of Ukrainian positions without censoring or like doing the best to make sure it's not geolocatable. But their commentary generally on the war has not been that terrible.
Russia, citizens of the People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, citizens of Kherson, Zaporizhia, members of parliament and of the Russian Federation, as you know, the People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. In the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia, there were referendums. We have tallied the votes. We know the results. People voted, and the decision is unequivocal. Today, we will be signing the membership agreements, making these territories members of the Russian Federation. I'm satisfied that the Federal Assembly will support the membership of these new 4 regions. The
thing that gets me about this is this speech is mostly boring, but has a few key parts that we got to point out, and that's why we're watching it. And also, it's historical to some degree. But the thing that gets me about this speech is I think Putin should have more fun with his job, right? If we look at Putin here, right? This is boring. This is incredibly boring. I mean, I know people talk about how much of a good speech maker Putin is, but the whole speech is pretty boring. There's a good way to tell if Putin wrote a speech or somebody else wrote a speech. And a good way to tell is if the speech sucks balls and it rambles like a madman. Like, if it sounds like it could come out of somebody just, like, on the street corner just rambling, then it was probably written by Putin. Because Putin, when he did this the speech right before the invasion, it was like an hour long, and it was just him lying about history for an hour, and very boring. It was very hard for him to get a good footing on the narrative front and establishing it with media. Because I remember people at the time saying, "Oh, people should just go watch Putin's speech and then they'll understand." No, you won't. It was a bad speech. Putin's not a good speechwriter. You can tell that his speech's quality notably go down when he's behind it. When he's behind the speech and he didn't just leave it to a PR team, he sucks really, really bad at making these speeches. It just shows how fine-tuned Putin's image should come off as a strong man and really competent and, somebody who has a way with words, how much that has been like specifically designed in advance. And when you actually leave Putin to his own devices, he's not that convincing. Unless you're a Russian nationalist who's just like a chauvinist for Russian history, and you agree with Putin on all of his historical perspectives, his speeches are just not good. And most people don't agree with him on his historical perspective. So that speech before the war was going to convince nobody that wasn't already convinced that Russia should invade. And this is another speech where he rambles, sounds like a schizo poster, and comes out convincing no one. And it's particularly bad that his speech sucks so much here, considering this is also at the same time 5,500 Russian troops are getting encircled at Lyman and getting annihilated, cut off from supply, while he's making this speech and announcing annexation of territory he doesn't even control, right? So it's like this moment, which was supposed to be like a big propaganda victory and try to like boost morale after having morale hammered due to the successful Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv and the pressure being put on his forces in Kherson. Like it just didn't amount to anything. Where is this? There's like the big rally that happened, but there was like yesterday they had these like actually no earlier today they had these stuff out in the square for just random people to come by and not having all these state employees bust to this location like happened here, and like nobody showed up in Kherson, nobody showed up in Zaporozhye or Donetsk and Luhansk to these like big rallying points where people were supposed to celebrate like them being annexed. It generally was not that big of a propaganda hurrah for Putin here. In large part, again, because he sucks at making speeches in the backdrop of where the speech was being made, when A, they don't control all the territory they're annexing, B, they just got hammered in Kharkiv, and C, his troops were getting encircled as he made the speech. It just, I don't think it had the intended effect. I think it raised the stakes a lot in the war, because now, like, there's no going back in a lot of ways. I think that it now allows them to deploy conscripts in Ukraine, and that's really it. It didn't really benefit them, like, morale-wise at all, I would say.
I'm satisfied that the Federal Assembly will support the membership of these new 4 regions. This reflects the will of millions of people.
This shit looks like a funeral. I'm gonna be for real. This doesn't look like a celebration, man. Nobody there looks happy. Nobody there is like happy, like, hey, we succeeded. Everybody there looks depressed, man. Everybody there looks like they're just, they're just kind of punching their card, Nobody there looks like they really believe what's being said right now. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna win, boys. Like they look a little they look a little sus of that, I think.
И это, конечно, их право, их неотъемлемое право, которое закреплено в первой
Needless to say, this is their fundamental right. Indeed, that right is enshrined in our own national law, and indeed in the UN Charter, which provides the self-determination of the people. And we know that our ancestors in the great Russia defended Russia. This is where our illustrious ancestors defended our territories all the way up to Catherine of Russia. Back in 2014, some people did not accept the fascist coup in the Ukraine. Some people died to defend the right to speak their own language.
Dude, it's crazy. I gotta say, Ukrainian fascism is some of the most diverse, inclusive fascism I've ever seen in my life. They were like, Sieg Heil, mein Führer, we will elect the fascist government of Poroshenko, which shall then transfer power democratically to a Jewish libcuck who will talk about gay marriage in a favorable light and actually do nothing Nazi related. Fuck, man. It's like Ukrainian fascism fucking sucks balls, like on the fascism scale. I mean, like on the libcuck scale, it's pretty successful. The thing is, there are like Ukrainian fascists, but they're just not they have not been empowered at all. Like I don't see them being empowered. Like, I don't see them like taking ministerial positions and enacting fascism. Like, what fascist policy has been enacted in Ukraine? Like, usually if you have a fascist government, they enact fascist policies. So I just, like, how is it a Nazi state if they've done nothing Nazi related? Like, I don't remember the statement from Hitler that was like, you know, maybe civil unions are actually something we should consider. I don't remember Hitler saying that. That wasn't a Hitler say. I don't think any fascist has ever said that.
Indeed, to defend their faith, their creed, their ways of life. These are the martyrs of Odessa and Katyn. These are the victims of terrorist acts conducted by the Kiev regime. These are volunteers, civilians, women, men and children.
By the way, the day he made the statement, like, while he was making the speech, a civilian convoy coming out of Zaporozhye was shelled by the Russian military, and it killed like 30 civilians, including children. I actually have a friend, and I talked about this a little bit on stream, who was injured in Mykolaiv yesterday and was in critical condition. He's gonna pull through. He's gonna be okay, but he was a civilian. They struck civilians over there, killed 3 people. Mykolaiv actually injured 12 others. I was there, I saw it myself. And so it's just, you know, always rich to see Vladimir Putin, whose government has acted with impunity towards civilians, talk about any other state engaged in terrorism.
Children, Ukrainian as well as Russian nationals, people's leader Zakharchenko of Donetsk, Stella Govoren, the public prosecutor of the Republic of Luhansk. Indeed, Gadzhimokov Medov and many other heroes lost their lives during the special military operations. These are our heroes. They are the heroes of the Great Russia. And let us have a minute of silence to pay tribute.
He said a minute of silence to pay tribute. Okay, so I'm gonna pay tribute to them. 1 second. I'll let the minute of silence go on their side, and I'll just, I'll be respectful. Okay, I'll be respectful.
We turn now to that deadly car bomb attack outside of Moscow. The victim was the daughter of high-profile Russian nationalist Alexander Dugin. Videos being shown on Russian television show the immediate aftermath of the blast, the vehicle engulfed in flames. You can see what appears to be Dugin in shock, his hands on his head moments after the detonation. Dugin has been a strong proponent of
Fredo, what happened to that fuck nigga? Fuck is you talking about? I ain't do none of that bitch nigga. If I did, why would I talk about it? You built just like a bitch nigga. So stay the fuck around me. I don't need to call that play. Do it myself and never even talk about it. Built just like a snitch nigga. Always wanna talk about shit. Tech to get around bitches wanna act cut. You know you ain't living like that. Ain't no I be with the littlest little niggas. Pull up where you chillin' at. And we gon' drop a whole 100 on them bitches. Really try to kill they ass.
Sorry, I misclicked.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
За выбором миллионов жителей в Донецкой и Луганской народных республиках.
We are here abiding with the decisions of millions of people living in the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. But behind this is our own long-lasting history. Going back thousands of years, people have kept their love for Russia, for the motherland, and no one can destroy that love in our souls. And that is why, generation after generation, the younger and the older have voted for our common future. Back in 1991, in Belodedje, an agreement was signed, and it was the representatives of the elite of the party at the time that took a decision, thinking not of the motherland, but making unilateral decisions that caused divisions amongst our own people. That led to a national disaster. And indeed, just like after the revolution, republics were created with artificial borders. And indeed, in the 1991 referendum, our own great nation was taken apart, was dismantled, and we were presented with a fait accompli. Well, I believe that the people behind this knew exactly what they were doing. And I'm thinking in particular of the Americans, but this is the past. The Soviet Union no longer exists, and Russia doesn't need it anyway. Such is not our purpose. Nonetheless, nothing is stronger than the will of the people. Here you have people who believe they are part of Russia because of their language, their history, their civilization. For hundreds of years they lived in the united territory, and they yearn for their historic motherland. For 8 long years, these people have suffered the bombing, the shooting, and no one, well, and they were subject to calls for hate against anything Russia, anything Russian.
Just talking about cancel culture again. Oh, they hate anything Russian, man. Like, this is such, he's such a, I want to call him a bitch, but I shouldn't. But he's just whining, man. You can't expect your country to invade another country for just fucked up imperial colonial reasons and not expect people to react negatively to that, right? I mean, oh my gosh, who would have thought that after the American invasion of Iraq, anti-American sentiments grew around the world? Who would have thought, oh my God, that if China invaded Taiwan tomorrow, anti-Chinese sentiment would grow as well? I understand that that's not good, but also it's something that would happen with any type of invasion. Anti-German sentiment in the United States during World War I was so bad that German Americans were literally lynched. Now, that's bad, and we can acknowledge that's bad, but you can't use that as a justification for your war or the annexation of territory. Germany couldn't use that as a justification for annexing more French territory or other territories in Europe or trying to gobble up parts of Africa.
People have been tortured, manhandled. But this is a message for Kiev and people in the West, people living in the territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. They are our citizens forever.
Dude, that sentence right there. The people of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye are our citizens forever. If there is ever a deal where he has to give up those lands, man, that will severely hurt Putin's image as he goes back on it. And I mean, the hawks will look negatively on that. The Russian military bloggers, the people like Igor Girkin, he's really putting another line in the sand here, man. And that shit might backfire if he isn't able to establish control over all of Donetsk or all of Zaporozhye, or keep control of Luhansk, or keep control of Kherson, which again, he doesn't control all of. Like that is a statement that could really bite himself in the ass. It also puts him in a more difficult position negotiation-wise, man. I mean, it is posturing, but that's posturing that people remember. People remember, like if I said, remember when Bush said no new taxes? And then if it kind of bit him in the ass when there was a situation where he might have to, increase taxes. So I think it's kind of like that. Like ultimately, I do think that the way propaganda works in Russia, stuff like this can kind of be put under the rug and people can do their best to make those forget. But I don't think the hawks in Russia will forget. I don't think the military bloggers will forget. And I do think the more he goes back on his promises, his promise not to mobilize, then he mobilizes. Promise not to send conscripts to Ukraine, conscripts got sent to Ukraine. Promises that he's going to annex all these territory and they're going to be citizens forever. When he goes back on that, man, people, eventually their credibility does get withered away and you do just start to look weak. And that's something that Putin does not want to project weakness.
Мы призываем киевский режим немедленно прекратить огонь
We call on the Kiev regime
ту войну, которую он развязал еще
to cease fire immediately, to put an end to the war it started back in 2014. We call upon the regime to go back to the negotiating table. We're ready for talks. We've said so before. But the people of these...
Dude, how delusional do you have to be to say, these people will be our citizens forever? Anyway, negotiate. You can't make a speech about how you're going to annex all these regions of Ukraine illegally from them as they're the ones making progress on the ground militarily and you don't even control all this territory and then say, anyway, let's negotiate. Negotiate what? You've just made your position clear. And the Ukrainians have the military upper hand for the time being. At least, the least you could say is that Ukraine has the initiative. Why should they give that up for a ceasefire, for Russia to reconsolidate as they make their intentions clear to take parts of Ukraine, to take more territory, to force the rule on Ukraine, man? Why does Ukraine have to be charitable? Why do we gotta play nice with this fucking loser? Fuck him. No negotiations until Russian soldiers are committed to leave the country. Like, if you're going to be making speeches about the annexation of territory, you can't expect Ukraine or Western leaders of the West to play nice with you and start signing ceasefires so you can reconsolidate to control that territory permanently and try to expand your hold on the territory you want to annex. He's making his intentions clear. What is there to negotiate? From the Russian position, what he would want to negotiate is Ukraine leaving Kramatorsk, giving back up Izium and Kupiansk possibly, or giving up Lyman as it's encircled right now. Why would the Ukrainians want to negotiate when they have the Russian army encircled at Lyman? When the Russian lines are fragile, are more fragile than a set of china? Why? Why would they want to negotiate? Oh, let's wait till we're in an advantageous military position and now we want to negotiate. No, that's stupid. It makes no sense. If the Russians aren't willing to give Ukraine what it duly deserves, then the Ukrainians should just continue to add the pressure and take it if necessary, man.
4 territories have made their choice, have made it.
Actually, something that Zelensky said in response to this, right? Like, if you know, Putin's going to escalate, maybe we will. He said they're willing to negotiate in response to this with a Russian president, but that president will not be Putin. And that puts some heavy pressure on Putin, because if you're a Russian oligarch and you want to end the war, you've just been given your signal. You've just been given your guidelines by the opposing negotiating party. And it really makes this more of a struggle for survival for Putin's government, which might end up backfiring on Zelensky's government, or becoming a bigger disaster for the Russians and succeeding gloriously.
Decision. There's no turning back. Russia will not let them down.
И сегодняшние киевские власти должны относиться к этому свободному волеизъявлению людей с уважением, и никак иначе.
The authorities in Kiev today must accept the free choice of these people.
It's not the free choice of I mean, this is kind of like obvious, right? I feel almost silly for saying this, but because some people like to play pretend on the internet about these referendums. I mean, obviously these referendums were a sham. There's already evidence of large-scale fraud, where we're seeing videos coming out of them just stuffing ballots. Of like, they don't even bother to mark it yes or no. And there's the citizens that did actually show up to vote. Like, they literally are asking, like, okay, do I vote yes or no? Like, which one am I supposed to vote so I can go home, right? As soldiers go round up people with guns, right? This was all organized last second. And here, son, it was actually canceled a month ago because they determined the situation was too dangerous to host a referendum. Then the Russians get hammered in Kharkiv, panic, need a PR victory, announce with only 3 days until the election that a new election was going to be held, a referendum, and the local government administration scrambled to put this together. They were like driving through communities with bullhorns saying referendum, referendum. And then they're getting like 1/10. No, they're getting, I think they're getting like less than a percentage, or less than 2% of the populations of Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Luhansk actually even turned out to vote, because they determined it was too dangerous to vote, or determined this is a fucking sham and I don't want to participate. And none of this, of course, is going to include any of the people who were displaced from the territory, of this already known to be rigged election. So there's a million problems with this. The first problem is that it's a sham and it's rigged in the first place. We have evidence of it. The second problem is nobody that was displaced gets to participate in the election because they're not within Russian-controlled territory. And speaking of that, all of the areas of Donetsk that is not under Russian-controlled territory, or all the territories of Kherson that's not under Russian-controlled territory, or Zaporozhye, they don't get to vote. And so they weren't included in this referendum. And also the participation in this area was unbelievably small. Unbelievably small percentage of the population actually turned out because they knew it was a fucking sham and nothing more than trying to put a stamp on Putin's agenda. And so it was not the democratic will of the people. And every time you see anybody try to pretend for even the slightest moment that this could actually be the democratic will of the people, then you found the deepest liquor of Russian boots. This person will deep throat a Russian boot if it means getting them attention on the internet, and they have no commitment whatsoever to democracy and zero commitment whatsoever to objectivity.
There's no other way. This is the only way to peace, and we shall defend our territory with all means available to us. We will ensure the security of our people. Such is our liberation mission. We shall rebuild the towns and villages, the schools, the museums. We shall develop industry, infrastructure. Indeed, we will restore.
I see some people noting it like all available means. I mean, that isn't a direct nuclear threat. Like, we need to get much closer to nuclear threats here for me to even consider for a moment that he might be serious about that. He is just like kind of like vague gesturing, so he just reminds the world that that's on the table. It's literally meant just to scare you while also having like no larger repercussions because he didn't actually do or anything or commit to anything. So it's literally nothing more than like the proverbial like nuclear dick swinging that like North Korea does all the time, but even to a lesser extent, because they're even more deliberate about it. They like play videos of missiles hitting the White House. Actually, Russians say TV has done that, but the government themselves will make the threat a lot more direct than the Russian government does.
The welfare system, health, education, pensions. We will restore safety and security, and people will see and feel the difference. They will feel the support. The Russian people of all towns and cities of Russia. Dear friends and colleagues, I should also like to turn to the soldiers and officers that have been involved in the special military operations. After the decree for partial mobilization, others have joined the ranks of the military, and I would like to call on all these soldiers and talk and speak to their wives and children, tell them why we're fighting the enemy that has been pushing the world into this crisis. Who stands to gain from this? Our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine that are part of our own people have seen with their own eyes what the leaders of the Western.
Dude, look how fucking depressed they all look, man. They all look like they're like 2 steps away from being Gaddafi'd in a fucking sewer pipe. Jesus Christ, man. They all look soulless, man. They have glossy eyes, man. Soulless individuals. God, I feel like if these guys like walked within the radius of a church, their skin would start to burn, man. God, what's with these people? These are like, if there's lizard people like that, this is like the front row of actual lizard people right here.
World have in store for them. The masks are down. The collective West naively believed that the world would take its tact in its stride. They thought that Russia would never rise again. It almost happened. We do remember the challenging years. in the 1990s, that Russia was able to resist.
Dude, I mean, Russia seems closer and closer to a regime, and I mean, the regime is desperate. They're in panic mode. This is an example of them being in panic mode. They have to announce this annexation because they have really nothing to show for the war. And the thing is, the last 4 months of territorial gains that they made in Ukraine, grinding warfare, actually the last 5 months, if we're being completely honest, was undone in a week by the Ukrainian army. They have not, I mean, all of their announcements, like all of that, like everything that they've like been able to like bang the drum on for the last 5 months, when we talk about square footage of land captured, was undone in a week. So what the fuck do they do? And this is like the only thing they could come up with. They would not announce the annexation of these territories so out of nowhere unless they were desperate and trying to make a move. I mean, like, this whole referendum was set up out of nowhere after it was canceled a month before because it was too dangerous to host. They literally forced it through. They didn't plan this. This only happened because they got hammered. This is them. This is like their last resort, just trying to grab whatever they can to like announce, look, victory, victory, we did the thing, we did the thing. I mean, they're really like in the kind of like, I don't want to say they're in death throes, but whatever's behind before a death throw, like as they're like literally fighting to survive, they're at that point. Like they're on the route towards their death throes.
Bounce back and regain its position in the world. And yet, the West is looking for opportunities to challenge Russia, to break it apart. Such has always been its intention, wreak havoc amongst the people of our country. They simply cannot accept the existence of Russia with its huge territory, its huge resources, with its people that will never agree to live under the dominion of others.
Well, dude, it's so funny to hear him say like, oh, the whole world has a problem with Russia, with all of its territory and all of its resources, and Russians would never agree to live under the dominion of others. Anyway, now let's force Ukraine to live under our dominion as we're invading another country. Nobody wants Siberia, okay? I'm gonna be for real. Nobody's like, give me, oh God, I'm gonna go to war for Kumyansk, or I'm gonna go to war for Vladivostok, right? I mean, the only nation I could think of that actually wants Russian territory would probably be China, right? And they're not even really a party in this situation. The only thing the Chinese are doing is getting Russian oil at $35 cheaper than what it was market value before the war, right? Because they're desperate to sell the oil because European energy buyers are just not coming up because of the sanctions, right? And so nobody's gonna annex. Nobody's annexing shit from Russia. Nobody's annexing. Belgorod isn't gonna be annexed by Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine just wants what is recognized as its internationally recognized territory. It wants Crimea, wants Zaporozhye, wants Donetsk, Luhansk. It wants what's its territory. It wants that. Even though if we wanted to play the dumb historical cards, we could talk about historical Ukrainian borders and we could be actually chopping up Russian territory, but we're not even doing that. Ukraine just wants its internationally recognized borders. Man, Russia could never have its people live under the dominion of another state, as they are practicing the exact opposite of that behavior by trying to make Ukrainians live under their dominion, man. My God. My God.
And yet, the West has been striving to bring about a new colonial system to keep plundering other people, other countries. It wants to hold the whole world to ransom. This form of hegemony the West wants to install and keep, such is its real intention. And that
Just God, man, talking about the U.S. colonizing the world as they are literally taking democratically elected Ukrainian mayors, taking them out of office, installing puppets who then make lists for the local Russian garrisons that they're deploying to round up people and build up these mass graves. And he's like, oh man, the colonialism of the West is so biting, it's so terrible. Oh my God. Anyway, let us all announce who our fiefdoms are going to be, our Russian fiefdoms, as we remove the local leadership that the local Ukrainians had elected, man. Jesus.
is why the West has been trying to challenge the democratic process, has been trying to support separatist movements, because the West simply will not accept such integration. They want the people to get away from sovereignty. They want the people to just walk into the hands of the United States. Indeed, some people in the West are happy to become the vassals of the United States. Others have been corrupted into this, and if they can succeed, they will destroy other countries, create humanitarian disasters. They will destroy millions of human lives. Indeed, they will sow terrorism through protection.
The thing is, right, is if you look at the fall of the Iron Curtain and the fall of the Soviet Union, it's not like we went to Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and we were like, oh, you know your brothers in Russia, they love you and love to make an alliance with you, but we were gonna put a gun to your head and force you to join. That didn't happen, right? Poland came to us. They came to NATO. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they came to NATO. Hungary came to NATO, right? Romania came to NATO, right? All these nation states came to NATO. Why did they come to NATO? Because they knew one day Russia would behave like this once it's back on its feet after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they wanted to integrate themselves with an alliance structure that would protect them. They wanted to integrate themselves with economies that were quite successful as the Soviet economies were, collapsing and falling apart post-collapse of the Soviet Union. So personally, it's hard for me to take his idea of like, oh, the West is corrupting them. We didn't really have to do anything to get all these people to join NATO. They ran to NATO. They ran to NATO for a reason, because they're scared of what Russia's doing right now in Ukraine happening to them. That's what actually eventually convinced Finland and Sweden to join NATO very recently, which is something that Putin's very angry about, because part of the whole reason he invaded Ukraine, at least according to him, was he didn't want the border to share a border with NATO, even though they've already shared a border with NATO for years with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
Protectorates, colonies, semi-colonies, they will stop at nothing to reach their objectives. And that is because of that intention.
I'm sorry. Like, I'm sick of this. The West will stop at nothing. All we're doing is sending them weapons and sanctioning, while they're dick swinging about ending the world with nuclear weapons, right? I mean, I feel like one of us is threatening to get a lot more crazy about the lengths they're willing to go to for their colonial war.
That the West has been waging war on Russia. They would like Russia to be a Western colony. But we're not talking here about cooperation on equal footing. They want to plunder us. They want us to be their slaves. We don't see eye to eye with them, and that's why they've been challenging our own philosophers, because our own culture, our own civilization represents a challenge to them. Our own well-being is a challenge to them. They don't need Russia, but we do need Russia. Let me remind you here that it's the West's aspiration to become the hegemon of the world has met with resistance from our own people, and yet the West still hopes to have its way. Indeed, in the past, there were examples of this. And yet, there were international treaties that are trampled upon, and so NATO is spreading the promises made to Soviet leaders went down by the wayside. International agreements are constantly flouted. We're told that the West is there to protect the international order based on rules, But who defined the rules? Who accepted those rules? This is absurd. For many years, we've seen these double standards, taking the world for fools. But Russia is a great country. It will never go down that way. It will never accept these rules.
Именно так называемый Запад растоптал принцип нерушимости границ. А сейчас по своему собственному усмотрению решает,
It is in fact the
кто имеет
West
право
that
на
has been
самоопределение, а кто нет.
violating
Недостоин.
the principle of non-interference at the borders. And yet they think that they can get away with it, but not others. Why do they think they can make decisions and not others? These are self-appointed rights.
Никакого морального права давать
That is
даже заикаться о свободе и демократии
why the West cannot accept
нет и не было никогда.
the will of the people of Crimea,
Элиты отрицают не только национальную
who also
суверенность,
made their
но и международное
choice.
право. Их
The
гегемония
Western
имеет ярко выраженный
elites
характер тоталитаризма,
simply
деспотизма.
refuse to accept the will of the
Они
people.
нагло делят мир на своих вассалов, на так называемые цивилизованные страны и на всех остальных, кто по замыслу сегодняшних западных
This despotic attitude proposes to divide the world between what they call the civilized world and the barbarian world. They are sticking labels on parts of the world where you have entire people, states, finding themselves.
This is what I mean, where like most of his speech is boring. It's just like boring. It isn't that engaging. I don't know. Maybe it's just a translation. It loses a lot of its passion. But again, man, when Putin gets to write his own speeches, they're never that good. And I think this is one of the speeches he wrote for himself.
Tarred with that brush. That's nothing new. The West has always behaved in such a way. The West's attitude consists in dividing the people into two kinds, the first class and the second class citizens, but we shall never accept that form of racism, not to mention Russophobia that is spreading around the world. It's a form of racism.
Racism! The West is racist! Imagine... Dude, we should have pulled that shit during the invasion of Iraq. When we invaded Iraq, and like the French were like, well, what are you doing? And the international community was, what is this? Why? And we were like weapons of mass destruction. The whole international community was like, what do you mean? That's a terrible explanation. We should have just been like, Colin Powell is a black man. Are you saying the black man is a liar? Do you think black people can't be trusted? Boom. The polling on the Iraq War would skyrocket if we used it as a way to say all the other nations are just racist against us Americans. We should have done that. It would have been a much smarter strategy. Thanks for the 300 bits, Super Greggy Pants. Can Russia not afford to get Putin a teleprompter? I don't think Russia has the spare parts to do it. They would need to import it from the West. So no, I don't think so. I think they've got somebody off screen, maybe like doing cue cards or something. Maybe they've got like, you know how lifeguards have the flags and they do the different signals? Maybe they've developed like a system like that for Putin.
Same attitude vis-a-vis our culture. If you're not with us, they say you're against us.
Yeah, Saddam Hussein was so Anglophobic, man. We just had to go in there and tell him how problematic he was. It's just our way of telling him was problematic included some rope and a few angry Iraqis.
Historic crimes were committed, and yet the West is constantly looking for other culprits. They want other people, other countries to beg for forgiveness. Look at colonial history. The West should be reminded that it is back in the Middle Ages that the West started this tradition of colonization. There was the slave trade, there was the plundering.
There it is. It's just, hey, the West colonized. He's talking about the slave trade. It's like, okay, the slave trade was bad. Could you, like, if somebody reinstitutes like slavery, you can't just say like, well, everybody else got to do slavery. That's not a justification for you doing it. other people have done. He's like, we never got to do the clan. Why don't we get a clan? We should have a clan. Like, no, that you don't understand. That's bad. It's bad. You can't justify it by just saying other people have done it, right? Like, imagine if, like, if Putin was up there, like, well, some people have complained about our filtration camps in Ukraine that are separating children from their parents and going through people's familial history to see if they have any ties to the government before torturing them and you know. But the Germans had camps, so you know, I think we have a freebie here. Like, that's not how this works. It's bad when everyone does it, including you.
Of India, Africa, there were the wars of France and England against China, Asia, and China had no choice but to open up its gates to facilitate the opium trade. And so entire people had no choice but consuming that drug.
He's talking about the opium trade in China as a justification as to why he invaded Ukraine. The thing that's crazy, though, is we invaded China to make them more subservient to us because they weren't serving our trade interests. That's part of the reason he is also invading Ukraine, because he doesn't want them to join the European Union, because that wouldn't serve his trade and economic interests, right? Not to mention, in his weight, I'm telling you right now, people in this country are using drugs to cope with the war, man. And they're using the lovely Russian import of crocodile. So, you know, actually, there might be a few comparisons you can make here. You know, back in the day, they had opium, and this time the Ukrainians are, they have crocodile produced in you know, Russia made, you know, made in Russia, helping with the homegrown team there, the homegrown team there. I think he said the word Ukraine maybe twice, and it is deliberate. He said the West probably 100 times. Yeah, the thing is, he cannot look at his people and say, look, Ukraine's kicking our ass. But if he looks at us, the people, and saying we're in a righteous struggle with the West, then they're like, oh, well, the reason we're getting our ass handed to us kinda is because we're fighting all of the West. When you're not, man. Like, you're fighting the weapons of the West. You're fighting a few foreign volunteer battalions, fighting some sanctions. But if all of NATO went to war with Russia tomorrow, man, Russia could not hold up. If they couldn't conquer Ukraine, there's no way they could stand up against all of NATO's armies. It's just they could cause a world-ending incident because of you know, nuclear weapons.
Entire people were wiped out. There were witch hunts against entire people conducted by the West. But we stand proud of the fact that here, in the 20th century, our great country, Russia,
Thank you.
spearheaded the anti-colonial movement.
Unless they're Tartars, or they're sent from Central Asia, or they didn't serve your interests, like in Afghanistan. Whatever.
We fought against inequality around the world. We fought against poverty around the world.
He was, you know what Putin was like? He was like, wow, this is, you know, it's really unfair how many Africans are starving, you know, and there's not as many white people starving. So we're going to Holodomor this up. He really increased the Soviet Union really worked on dealing with that income inequality.
And yet, there you have Western elites completely Russophobic, angry against us because we dared resist. And we succeeded in creating a world of fair trade thanks to the strong state that we built. Our state was based on fundamental values, Christian values, but also
reminder as he talks about the Christian values of Russia, that the gayest part of LA has higher church attendance rates than Russia on average.
Islamic and Buddhist values, indeed many others. We know there were many plans to intervene in Russia in the 1917 revolution, and afterwards Russia was able to defend itself, and yet the West was
Dude, you know, I think his age should just make Putin a Substack that he could rant on instead of doing this in public and embarrassing himself, honestly.
able to reach out to Russian resources at the end of the 20th century. We were called partners, but we were treated as colonies. Billions of dollars worth of wealth was plundered from our country.
We have forgotten nothing, and the residents of Lugansk, the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia have voted for the reunification of our territory. Thank you.
That person doing the subtitles leaned back in his chair, and then he realized what he was doing.
Western countries speak constantly about the fact that they bring freedom and democracy, but it's...
Mover and Shaker Hamza Prime number $5. He is a dictator and not a good one.
Amen. I also think dictatorship is bad. Hot take. Putin sucks. Amen.
Totally.
Dude, I'd like to make just periodical $5 donations just off of saying Putin bad. Best job in the world I have.
False, erroneous. It's the opposite. It's exploitation instead of freedom. It's slavery. And all this world order is anti-democratic and anti-liberal. It's a total hypocrisy. The United States is the only country who used nuclear weapons twice in history by annihilating Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The US with the British reduced.
Dude, it's so bad. Man, the US nuked a country in World War II. So it sucks that everybody's criticizing us for possibly wanting to end the world now. Number one, it was bad that we did that, right? But number two, we were also the only country with those. So they didn't have world-ending potential. So the situation has changed a little bit since World War II, I would say. Not an endorsement, just saying the stakes are much higher. The precedent has changed since World War II. And I'm telling you, if the Soviet Union had those weapons before us, they would have used them. Do you think they wouldn't have used them? 100% they would have. The Nazis would have. The Japanese would have. Every world power on the planet would have used them during World War II. Even the ending days of World War II. The Soviet army stopped to let the Germans clean up the Warsaw Resistance during their advance. The Soviets were not beneath using dirty tactics that kill a lot of civilians. People talk about a lot, and Putin's actually about to talk about in this speech, about the bombing of like cities like Dresden that was particularly brutal of Germany, and like how bad it was that we did that as America, even though it was the Soviet Union that requested the bombing of Dresden. Even though the communists afterward would say, oh, that shows the brutality of the West that had the bombing of Dresden, even though it was the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin who requested that bombing.
Used to ruin without any military need. The cities of Hamburg and Dresden without military need. It was just for demonstrative purposes. And the same goes for the nuclear bombing. It was about intimidating the whole world. The United States...
The thing is, we had other opportunities to use it, like in Korea, and we decided against it despite what the American Caesar Douglas MacArthur tried to make us do during the war in Korea. We have set a precedent since then of not using nuclear weapons that we should keep, because the situation is very different between 1945 and 2022 when it comes to the capabilities of nuclear armed states. We just didn't have the means to end the world in 1945. We do now.
Have left a very bad memory in Korea and Japan, the use of napalm, chemical weapons, Germany, the Republic of Korea, Japan, are viewed as allies on an equal footing. What type of equality does that represent? In fact, these are leaders who are under orders, who are subject to eavesdropping, not just in their offices, but in their homes, and the whole world swallows that up without raising an eyebrow. And the vassals, well, it will be the Europeans, will be the subject of Euro-Atlantic solidarity. This destructive policy, this will have pushed millions of people into migration. Thousands of people heading for Europe will perish. And this wheat that comes from Ukraine, that will leave Ukraine in order to keep alive famished populations. In fact, this wheat is heading for Europe to the detriment of countries that need it. And that is sheer deception. And the Americans are using tragedies in other countries in order to weaken their rivals. It affects France, Spain, Italy. Washington requires ever renewed sanctions against Russia. The majority of European leaders obey. They understand that when the United States imposes on the EU that it should abandon Russia's energy resources, well, if that compels Europe to destroy its own industry, the Europeans understand that, but would rather serve others' interests. Not just the fact of being lackeys, but they're also betraying their people, but that's a matter for them. And the Anglo-Saxons are not happy with the mere sanctions. They're embarking on acts of sabotage. They attacked, they targeted international infrastructure that crossed the Baltic seabed. It's an international infrastructure. We know who benefits from the crime. The U.S. dictate is the dictate of violence, of force. And this can be couched in more attractive terms, but...
Dude, I'm sorry, but Putin's a sleeper, man. Can you believe, dude, this is the guy that everybody called an alpha Chad for so many years, man. You know, it'd be an alpha Chad, like an alpha Chad move to do. Like, the whole world already hates Russia, right? He's already put himself in that position where the vast majority of the world does not like Russia because of what they did in Ukraine, right? So you know what he should do? He should have came out, you know, dressed up like Stalin, full on bushy mustache, got the whole thing on. He's got a pipe in his mouth, fucking puffing. He's smoking weed up there while also arresting people for weed because, again, who gives a fuck? He's the president. He can do whatever he wants. He goes up there, you know, backed up by Russian broads in bikinis with the colors of like Donetsk and Luhansk and all of that, right? And he goes up there.
And Shaker Hamza Prime number $10. Putin and George W. Bush need to be jailed together. Bush allowed this animal to run wild. Russia was supposed to be a democratic republic, sad face.
It should have been a democratic republic. It should have been. You know, Putin should go to prison for his government's war crimes, the illegal invasion of Ukraine, torture, the rapes perpetrated by his troops, the building of mass graves, and Bush should be arrested for his art. It's not that good. Oh, in Iraq. Iraq's around there somewhere, I think. Thank you for the $10. I appreciate it. But yeah, no, just full on Stalin outfit, got mustache, got the whole thing, got the bras and bikinis. You know, he's just got like, you know, he should just be up there, just go up there and say like, you know what? Here's what I'm saying. I have big bombs. I can end the world. I'm going to do whatever I want. Everybody sucks. All my generals are fired. I'm ordering every soldier to go invade you. Just to go and just lean into it. Like, why be reserved and try to appeal to the international community when you've known you've lost the plot? Like, they've already lost it. They've already lost it, both mentally and when it comes to the international narrative. Nobody cares about the Russian narrative anymore. So just like lean into it. Just have fun with it, man. Just have fun with it. He should go up there and say, you know, like, Russia's my hoe and I'm gonna pimp my hoe. And instead of you giving me money, you guys are going to give me your sons and we're going to send them to Ukraine to die. And Navalny, you're a bitch, and he like throws up some gang signs and then just ends the meeting. Like, he should just do that at this point, because nobody in the international community cares, and it's not like a single person in that room could do anything to stop him, because all of them are cowards who allowed him to do this invasion in the first place. So we might as well lean into it.
It is a right that is based on violence, which leads them to deploy hundreds of military bases throughout the world and to forge an ever-growing number of military alliances, such as
Well, actually, it's the top of the hour. Actually, it's almost like been an hour and a half since I started streaming. So I do want to show our new sponsors. I need to use the bathroom, so I'm going to play them quick. Our new sponsors, and I know this is crazy to believe, but PragerU is actually reaching out to a few left-wing content creators so you guys can see some alternative perspectives. And they've given me a decent sum of change in order to advertise and play this advertisement for everybody. So here's the PragerU ad for today's broadcast.
Let me read a letter I recently received. Dear Dr. Breen, why has the Combine seen fit to suppress our reproductive cycle? Sincerely, a concerned citizen. Thank you for writing. Concerned? Of course, your question touches on one of the basic biological impulses, with all its associated hopes and fears for the future of the species. I find it helpful at times like these to remind myself that our true enemy is instinct. Instinct.
It's a very niche reference. Very niche. I'm sure nobody got it. Okay, let's keep going.
And others. It's also the military axis between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. Those who are against Western hegemony of...
Is this a Brendan Schwab special? That's a more niche reference, okay? Look, okay? Brendan Schwab, while not funny, made a lot of money. And so if I'm as unfunny as Brendan Schwab, but can make anywhere near the money, that would be fantastic.
Viewed as enemies, and it's on that principle that the U.S. military doctrine is based, as well as that of NATO. The neo-colonial plans of the West are presented in a totally hypocritical manner, with a claim for friendship and peace. But in fact, it's the same features that we find in the successive strategies. It's all about putting an end to and to scupper any form of attempt to sovereignty. It affects Syria, Iran, African states, as well as partners and allies of the United States. As soon as they don't like something, well, the Americans will order sanctions against a bank, a company. This is a practice which will spread. They're targeting everyone, including our immediate neighbors, the countries of the CIS. They view, it's all wishful thinking on their part, and this principle of sanctions against Russia, well, they thought that they were going to be able to control the whole world. But in fact, these sanctions are simply prompting reactions, except on the part of masochists. The majority of countries refuse to accept that situation. They want to maintain.
The Russian economy is in shambles. They're making Ladas without airbags. They've seen like an 80% reduction in like motor sales, like car sales. They're tearing apart planes to fix other planes. They're taking spare parts off of one plane and put it on another plane because they can't import the parts that they need. They've seen I think it was like an over 60% reduction in GDP when it comes to industries like construction. They've seen probably over 1 million people flee the country, many of them high value skilled workers, many of them very wealthy people. I mean, I would say that Russia is not doing well economically. and like touting sanctions or resistance against sanctions as like in any way at a speech when Russia's dealt with the sanctions so poorly, I think is a bad move. But I will say that is one of the things that they have won the narrative on, is making people think that the sanctions is not effective on them, when sanctions are absolutely just dogging their country. Like, oh my God.
Rational cooperation with Russia, and that's a reaction that the West wasn't expecting. They're used to thinking in a very stereotypical way. But in fact, their thought process has become ossified over time, and they maintain their situation of exception. And there's a genuine famine of information. The truth was buried.
The truth isn't buried. It's just you suck at making your argument, and your truth, your quote-unquote truth, is like very obviously faked. Like, for example, one of the things they did to try to build a justification for the war is they made people dress up like Ukrainian soldiers. They made Russian soldiers dress up like Ukrainian soldiers and film themselves invading Russia to say, hey, look, Ukraine invaded us, right? But it was geolocated, and it was geolocated to be within territory already controlled by Russia in the Luhansk Oblast, clearly showing that it was a faked video. And when you pump out stuff like that on the regular, like every single week, and you keep getting exposed for your lies, or the lies that they said around Bucha, or the lies about Daria Dugina's assassination, or the lies about the execution of Azov prisoners that they blew up, murdering many of them, with the lies about torture to people like Aiden, who just got back from Russian captivity. Just all these lies, like eventually, like people just don't believe you. I mean, they said, of course, there was going to be training exercises on the border of Ukraine, and they lied about that. They lied about the little green men in Crimea and the annexation of Crimea. They lied about their supplies to the rebels. They lied about war crimes. So it's like, yeah, nobody really believes the Russians. They don't seem very trustworthy when it comes to the claims they make.
Under a mountain of lies and propaganda, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to spread. But we can't feed people with millions of dollars that have been simply printed. We can't just heat people's homes with money that has no value. In fact, you can't feed people with paper. You need to feed them with proper food. And these inflated capital values will serve no useful purpose. We need energy products, so the Europeans have led to convince their citizens not to turn up the heating, and all those who are against termed extremists or enemy, and Russia is portrayed as the source of all ills. In fact, Western elites, as we understand it.
I mean, the thing is, like, people are saying, oh, it's the West's economic response that caused this. To some degree, the economic response from the international community is in part due to Russia causing economic chaos, because when you invade countries and mess up supply routes, right, and cause alliances to clash like that, it's going to cause economic chaos. The primary culprit for the economic chaos we've seen in response to this war is Russia, because they're the one who launched the war. They're the one who did the invasion, right? We're not even talking about the last year, just February 24th. If I invaded a country and that caused sanctions and a bunch of chaos and like international trade to fall off, and then grain shipping routes get undermined because of occupation, like, yeah, it's my fault if I lost the war. If I launched the war, I made the calculation that economic chaos was worth it. Putin just didn't think it would happen because he thought the war would be over in 3 days. And he was very, very wrong. But still, it's their fault, man. It's not the fault for people reacting, you know, normally as they would react to seeing a nation invade a young democracy and try to occupy it as they start filling up mass graves.
don't have the intention of seeking a solution to the food crisis that started because of them and well before our special.
You invaded the country growing the food. How is it our fault if the food can't get out? Because you're bombing the country and firing upon the ports that the Ukrainians use to ship food out, man. And then you loot the food, illegally steal the food and sell it to international markets out of Russia. And then you're blaming everybody else, man. I mean, come on. Come on, man. Like, if let's say Iraq provided the world with semiconductors, and then in 2003 we invade and the semiconductor markets internationally are affected, can we really say that that is not at all the United States' fault? We're the one who invaded. Come on.
Military operation in Ukraine. It's not my intention to resolve all the problems of inequality or injustice. I'm sure they're ready to use all the recipes that they have at their disposal, and the West at the beginning of the 20th century experienced World War I, World War II, allowed the United States to overcome the Great Depression that allowed them to become the country that, with the dollar, has the world's reserve currency. The situation deteriorated, but nevertheless the West was able to retrieve the situation thanks to the collapse of the Soviet.
What? This dude is just dead. Like, this guy's literally, look at this guy. Look at that guy. Second guy on the left. Next to the foreign minister. Look at that. He's just dead. He died. Like, no. This dude, the second dude on the right, he's asleep too. You look at his eyes, they're just closed. He's napping. He's napping, man. They're just dead. This might be TOS. He just went into a stroke and died, like, during the speech, man.
The West was able to retrieve the situation thanks to the collapse.
Look at it. He's not moving. He's not moving.
Of the Soviet Union. And so European countries sought to destroy the Soviet Union, and all countries seeking autonomous action came up against the reactions. Well, we can expect the global system to collapse, and a war, of course, allows us to draw a line under the balance sheet, and it's obvious that today's neo-colonialist model is doomed. The masters of this model will, right up until the end, seek to cling to it and to remain the masters of this market looting, which will deprive billions of individuals, most of humankind, of the right to determine their own future. And it's the very negation of the essential fundamental of moral and family rights. I'd like to return to what I said earlier and address all citizens, not just colleagues in the room, to all Russian citizens. Do we want in our country, in Russia, instead of a mother and a father, that we should have parent number one, parent number two? They've gone mad. Do we want that in our schools, in the early primary schools, that we should teach this perversion, that we should talk about not just men and women, but that there would be an additional gender? Is that what we want for our children, for our country? We will not accept that. We have our own future that lies ahead of us. And this is an attack directed not just against us, but all society.
Dude, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm stopping the speech for a second. I'm sorry. Okay, I make this tweet, right? Because I don't think we've gotten to it yet. Or if we did, I just missed it. But in this speech, right, Putin does cite transgender people. In his speech about why he's annexing territory in Ukraine, right, illegally annexing Ukrainian territory, he brings up transgender people. What this has to do with the annexation? Nothing really. It's just trying to signal. It's virtue. This is unironic virtue signaling towards international audience, which might be sympathetic to that. Because if you're like, oh, Putin said some red-based, pilled, awesome, amazing stuff about trans people, maybe he's also awesome but based when it comes to the war. That's like the idea, right? They're trying to signal to the right wing internationally. Right? Because that's where they've seen the most successes. It's not that they haven't seen any success in getting left-wingers to support, but most of their success has been with people like Nick Fuentes, right? It has been with the international far right, right? There's a reason why most of when you look at primetime news shows, the one that attacks Ukraine the most is Tucker Carlson, right? And so my point by bringing this up is it's wild to think Putin could bring this up for two reasons, right?
Mover and Shaker Hamza Prime number $5. I knew Putin was a criminal when he murdered those innocent people on Malaysian flight MH17. He was planning this.
Thank you so much for the $5. I appreciate that. I really do. But the thing is, there's two ways to look at this. The first way to look at it is this is unrelated. This war, outside of like I'm going to be releasing a video soon about being a homosexual in Ukraine and queerness in Ukraine, because I talked to some queer Ukrainians, I interviewed queer Ukrainians, I talked to them and got their perspective about the war. Shocker, they all support Ukraine being independent and they are heavily against the Russian invasion. Not really that shocking if you've ever met a fucking Ukrainian person, right? But there's two ways to look at this. A, this has nothing to do with transgenderism, right? Or transgender, whatever he was going to call it, transgender ideology, gender ideology, whatever he would call it. This has to do with Russia's imperial and colonial ambitions, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, Ukraine isn't even like that LGBTQ plus friendly. I mean, when it comes to European nations, is actually on the lower end. There's no gay marriage in this country. There's not, I mean, there's being progress in favor of gay marriage, right? We have progress in favor of civic unions. That's good. There's non-discrimination protections in the country. The polling data seems to indicate the Ukrainian society is going in the right direction, but it's not exact, like it's not the United States, it's not Germany, it's not France, it's not the nations that are more liberal on this. It's not Denmark, it's not Sweden. I mean, it really is. It's barely better than Poland. Is it even better than Poland? I would say probably barely better than Poland. If it's better than Poland. If any, I remember one person said it's probably between Russia, like Ukraine is the state between Russia and Poland. It like has huge potential to advance LGBTQ plus issues, especially the polling data is going in the right direction. But like it's not really like a super like quote unquote woke or LGBT friendly state. And so that's also why it's weird to see him cite that. Right? But then I see stuff like this, right? Where I just bring up that this is ridiculous, right? And then Dan Simpson, right? A kind of like Marxist Leninist type, communist Twitch streamer responds, yeah, Dylan, I'm sure you crow Nazis love trans people, Lamau. And then he cites a bunch of stuff about problems that gay and trans Ukrainians face. You can read this tweet and come away with it with a lot of conclusions. None of the conclusions is, wow, Ukraine is amazing on LGBTQ plus issues. All of it would be, this has nothing to do with the war, and Ukraine isn't even that like amazing on these issues, so it's weird for you to bring it up. But there's two angles to go at it. Number one, if Ukraine wins, the situation for gay people in Ukraine will be much better than if they lose. Not only from a humanitarian like perspective of they won't be occupied and there'll be less people dying because of the war, but also when it comes to their ability to organize in favor of themselves. So when it comes to issues like free speech, freedom of association, freedom to organize, they have non-discrimination protections in Ukraine. They don't have the gay propaganda laws that they have in Russia. They're not being put in camps like gay people in Chechnya were put in camps and tortured to death, right? That isn't happening. Of course there's hate crimes. Of course there's progress that needs to be made. But if you talk to queer Ukrainians, the idea of Russian occupation is especially terrifying for them. And a future in the European Union and with Western integration and moving forward with a Zelensky government or any government of even that stripe to going to leftward of that is much, 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 much better than anything you could possibly imagine under Russian occupation or the future of Ukraine under Russian influence. And that's just facts, man. That's just facts, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And every time I see this, like Ukro Nazis, can we be for real, right? Could you imagine if every time we brought up an ethnic group, we just said this is their political beliefs because they're part of that ethnic group. This is what they are. They're Nazis. They're Ukraine Nazis, the Ukro Nazis. What if I was just Cubans, you mean like authoritarian lovers? Or if I was Somalis, you mean Islamic extremists, Islamic jihad Islam, Somalis, because jihadism is a major issue in Somalia. In any other circumstance, we'd be like, dude, that's fucking ridiculous. But it rolls off the tongue for many people in Ukraine because they have no attachment to Ukraine. They don't give a fuck about Ukraine, right? Because to him, there's Ukraine are just a bunch of fucking brown shirts. If they die, fuck them. Who gives a fuck, right? They're Ukro Nazis. Who cares, right? But to me, these are my friends, right? These are good human beings. These are good people. And whether he likes it or not, a westernized lip-cuck Ukraine will be much better for queer people than a Russian-occupied Ukraine. Whether he likes it or not, man. Who's this guy? He's just some hard left Twitch streamer. He didn't even he completely missed the point about what this tweet even was. But anyway. God, I wish I could just post the interview I had with a queer Ukrainian about the future of Ukraine. Strange take considering your past rhetoric on Canadians. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Imagine choosing to dehumanize the people being invaded, not the invader. Man, I gotta say, Nazism has really progressed a lot, man. It's made a lot of progress, it's become, I would say pretty progressive, to hire a Jew to lead the international movement of fascism and Nazism, I think is very it's a very, very progressive move. And having the leader of Nazism in Ukraine, Zelensky, then announced that they're going to move towards civic unions and they're looking towards gay marriage. I mean, I would say he's bringing Nazism into a new age. Yas queen indeed, Yas queen. What a bad take. Anyway, let's go back to the speech. I just saw it and it miffed me a bit. What a bad take.
Societies, but also Western societies, this very negation of humankind, this denial of freedom. And when Christ, during the Sermon on the Mount, that we will recognize the men through the fruit that they bear. And this is what we see not just in the world, but in the West. The world is entering a period of revolutionary transformation. There are new development centers that represent the majority of the global community. They are defending a multipolar world where they'll be able to defend their independence and their true, genuine freedom, their right to self-development that is creative throughout the world, including in the United States and Europe. There are many people who share our mindset, and we sense very much the support of these people, and we also sense that there's an anti-colonialist movement that is developing throughout the world against this unipolar hegemony, and it's that force that will determine the future of global geopolitics. Today, we're fighting for justice and freedom, for ourselves, for Russia, to renounce despotism and dictates that are elements of the past, and the idea of a superiority by birth of a certain class of humankind. We must turn that page of history. It's an irreversible process. The world will not go back to the previous page. The period during which we had to conduct this battle, this struggle for our country and for our people, is the battle for Russia that we are waging.
За большую историческую Россию, за будущие поколения, за наших детей, внуков и правнуков.
The great Russia, the great.
Dude, that's actually a great example. Somebody just brought this up, Bammy, in chat. Imagine if people kept bringing up the fact that Abbas denied the Holocaust in every time we talked about Israeli politics. True. Or we could talk about, for example, the president of Iran just denied the Holocaust on 60 Minutes like a week ago, right? Could you imagine if I used that to say, Iran is actually a Nazi state. It's a Nazi state. They're Zig Heiling, right? And therefore, we cannot renegotiate and re-enter the JCPOA. We can't. It's impossible. We can't do it because then you're working with the Nazi state. That would be ridiculous. And that's much further on the far right Zig Heili Nazi path than the Ukrainian government currently is, which is led by a Jew whose family are Holocaust survivors, right? My question would be, would he call all Iranians Nazis? Would he say, the Irani Nazis? Would he say that? Or would he say Palestinian Nazis, right? Because of what other Palestinian leaders have said about the Holocaust? Like, I just doubt he would hold the same consistency for any of these other groups. It's just that the West supports Ukraine, so it's convenient. I think that's a large part what it is.
Historic Russia for our children and for our grandchildren. We must defend them against these outrageous experiments that seek to undermine what they think, to ensure that they want to eradicate our history and our culture. And we must therefore close ranks, come together, and rely on the solidarity, creativity, and justice. Let me end by quoting Ivan Lenin, who's a true
Mover
patriot.
and Shaker Hamza Prime number $5. This is the worst speech ever. Here comes another Russian revolution. Putin needs to go.
He needs to go, okay? Look, all I'm saying, okay, is that Putin, okay, there were so many people in that room, many of which within just quick running distance, okay? All you need is just 5 seconds in range, okay? That's all you need, okay? You get one person, okay, in there, and you get some fertilizer, you get some nails and glass, okay, and you get this tube, okay? You get, okay, I'm going a little, okay, reel it in. Gappy, thank you so much for the tier 1 beats up for 22 months and for the endorsement of the statement I just made. I appreciate that. All the people in the room had a shoe. True.
Ilian, who's the true
in Roblox? No, real life. Pulling Sam Hyde.
If it's my country is Russia, it's in Russia that I love, in Russian that I sing and speak. I believe in the spiritual strength of the country. Its destiny is my destiny. Its strength is mine. Its misfortunes are my misfortunes, and its fulfillment is my joy. These are principles which, after 1,000 years, bring us to a choice, and a choice was made by the peoples of the People's Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk and the inhabitants of the territories of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. With our people, they have chosen to live and to be victorious with.
Dude, there's so many people are within range, man. Just one baseball throw with a pipe. Oh, never mind. Okay, I'm sorry.
Russia.
Dude, honestly, you don't even need that. You just need like a heavy rock, okay? If you just could smuggle in a sharp rock, okay? Just one swing.
We are one, and Russia is with us.
Начинается церемония подписания документов.
Signing.
And here they do the like whole ceremony. I haven't actually pulled up them doing the ceremony because it's all in Russian. So we're not going to watch too much of it, but here's all of the occupation forces. These are all like the leaders of the different fake little proxy states that Russia set up. Like on the left here, you've got the dude who's head of the Kherson Oblast. Next to him on the right, Zaporozhye. Next to that is Luhansk, and next to that is Donetsk. So left to right is Kherson, Zaporozhye, Luhansk, Donetsk. This guy on the left, by the way, I think he was poisoned. Apparently not poisoned enough though. Here's Putin doing the signing, annexing. Starting with Donetsk. That's Pushilin. He's a coward piece of shit who ended up fleeing immediately when the going got tough in Donetsk and Luhansk during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and he's a collaborator. Also, a lot of the people who have led the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic are literal former FSB agents. Like, for example, Igor Girkin, who was the former Ministry of Defense for the Donetsk People's Republic, also a war criminal who shot down a civilian airliner. He actually is literally a former FSB agent. I mean, when we set up proxies in other countries, and it's not like we've never done that before, but when we do it, we don't usually literally put former CIA agents as the head of a country. It's a little too on the nose, you know what I mean? Definitely when it's open that they're FSB agents, like it's on the public record too. Now they're annexing Luhansk. There's a leader of Luhansk. There's Zaporozhye. There's their occupation leader.
И глава Херсонской области Владимир Васильевич Сальда.
A curd is a curd.
Hey, somebody donated. Sorry, somebody... Dude, he's so bad at this. Hey, Mover Jigger, $5. You can wipe your shit with that paperwork, Putin. Amen. Amen. Amen, Hazra. Hey, 1 second. Well, I'll let this finish and then we'll look at the tweet because Danny responded. He's not happy. Okay. He shamed me because I'm helping Ukrainian queers be hurt by NATO's posturing.
Между Российской Федерацией и Донецкой Народной Республикой. Российской Федерацией и Луганской Народной Республикой.
Luhansk People's Republic? Then they do Luhansk. They have to clap every time. Can't they just do them all and then they clap one big time?
И Запорожской областью. Российской Федерацией и Херсонской областью. О принятии в Российскую Федерацию Донецкой Народной Республики. Луганской Народной Республики. Запорожской области. И Херсонской области. И образовании в составе Российской Федерации новых субъектов. Исполняется государственный гимн российской...
Dude, look how small Putin is. Look how small he is. Look how small he is. Look how tiny, man. He's so tiny. What the fuck, man? I forget sometimes how tiny he is, dude. He's so tiny, dog. He's so tiny. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love my short kings, but God, it just always gets me, man. Small man with big plans.
Burns is an immoral, morally corrupt,
bankrupt man. Hey, Kez. Thank you for the prime for 60 months. Dylan Byrne is a morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Based. Hey, look at that guy. He is a Kurd. That guy's wearing a war criminal's.
And Shaker Hamza prime number $5. Look how stupid Putin looks. Reminds me of George W. Bush. Mission accomplished, lol.
It is unironically a mission accomplished situation. I actually have something for this. I think I sent it to Gappy recently. This right here, this is Putin right now. This is unironically Putin because he doesn't have a choice. He's fucked. But where were we? God, I love this meme. Where were we? You see this guy right here on the left. He has a patch on his arm. That's the Sparta battalion. It is a Russian battalion that's been fighting in Ukraine since 2014 on behalf of the separatists that Russia backs. The proxies that Russia has been using in Ukraine, and they are accused of probably, like, I think they're one of the battalions in Ukraine that have been accused of the most war crimes, persecution of religious minorities, torture, murder, you name it. Really, really, really bad group of folks. Not nearly as fun as the guy from the Metro games, okay? Not nearly as fun as those guys. He's so tiny. He's so tiny. God, man. Again, it's not bad that he's tiny. It's just, it just blows me away. They really work really hard to make Putin look as big as possible when they can, but they just can't do anything here. What are they doing? What is this? What is this bullshit? What are they doing? Are they gonna do like a go team? Are they gonna do one of those? Okay, now it just looks inappropriate. Now it looks really inappropriate. Okay, there we go, better. They're chanting Russia, by the way, for those curious. See, there you go. Now we see the first smiles of the whole event. Okay, that's enough of that.